You're tuned in to the Dr. Kinney Show, and I'm your host, Dr. Erin Kinney, a naturopathic doctor and speaker dedicated to unraveling the mysteries of your body and guiding you back into balance. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Dr. Kinney Show. So, you have a financial credit score, but what about your cortisol debt score? You usually know what your financial credit score is. You might know how much money's in your bank account, how much is coming in versus how much is going out, but we don't always know how much cortisol we're spending or earning. Today, I want to talk about the Cortisol Debt Assessment, which is a quiz you can take on my website. It's at the beginning of the book, and I developed it because some of us really need to understand what's happening in our lives and in our bodies, and how much energy do we have coming in versus how much energy do we have going out. So just like any bank account, we have this energy or cortisol bank account. I talked about it a lot in last week's episode, so you can go listen to that again. But essentially, cortisol is the hormone that gives us energy. It helps us handle stress. It's what wakes us up in the morning, and it helps us reduce inflammation. So it's the hormone that our body uses to help us handle and get things done. So we want to have a lot of it in our bank account. When you do anything, you spend that cortisol. And when you rest and you sleep, you earn it back. And so the reason I created this debt score is because most of us are usually aware of what's happening in our external world. We're aware of what's happening with work, with traffic, with our kids, with our relationships. So we're usually aware of how much we're spending on those things. Or maybe you're not, but most of us have a decent idea of what our spends are there. But there's another bucket of stressors, which I talk a lot about in the book, and I'm going to talk about today. It's what we call internal stressors. And so these are things that are happening inside your body. So this could be a blood sugar dip. This could be a nutrient deficiency. Maybe you're deficient in iron or vitamin D. Those deficiencies are actually a stressor to the body. Could also be a food allergy or a food sensitivity. Could also, for a lot of the patients we treat at the Kinney Clinic, could be what we call a stealth infection, like a tick-borne disease like Lyme disease or the Epstein-Barr virus, which you know I've talked about many times on the podcast. But so these internal stressors drain your energy just as much, if not more, than what's happening in your external life. So in this cortisol debt assessment score, there are two parts. There's your external or your life load, and there's your internal or your hidden load of stressors. And so you can go take the test. Again, I encourage you, maybe you want to take it before this episode because I'm going to talk about what the different scores mean, or listen to the episode and then go take the test later. And the thing I really like about the test, because I take it myself now actually, is you can use it as kind of a marker. And there are certain times, certain months in my life where I'm like, oh yeah, I got a good score. I think I'm handling things. And there are other times where I'm like, oh, you know what? My score is a little higher than I'd like. I need to refocus on doing the things that I know help keep my account full. So before we dive into what the different scores mean, I want to talk about just the concept of stress in general, because stress isn't always like bad. It doesn't have to be. I think sometimes we think of stress as being, oh my gosh, when I'm stressed, I feel emotionally terrible. I get plenty of patients that come in to see me and I'll ask, hey, what's your stress level like? And they'll say, oh, I'm not stressed. I'm not stressed at all. I have a good job. I have a great marriage. We have enough financial security. But then when we start talking about their symptoms, it's very clear to me that their body is probably under stress. And so what I want you to start to think about is stress as not a bad thing or necessarily a good thing, but stress as simply an energy spend. When we are in a stress state, whether that's a good thing, like example, I'm here recording this podcast right now, I'm spending my energy. I'm excited to be here. I love talking on the podcast. It's great. But I'm still in a stress state and it's still an energy spend, right? Or when you're planning a wedding, which is something really exciting, sometimes that can feel emotionally stressful, but most of the time it's good stress, but it's still an energy spend. So I just want you to start to think about that. There may be things in your life that you love and are amazing and don't feel emotionally bad per se, but it's still spending your energy. And if you have a lot of those things and we don't have enough deposits, that can still create a deficit in your cortisol bank account. So that's what this test is going to really help you assess. Maybe there's some things that are happening in my life externally that, again, I do really like. Maybe I just started my dream job, but it's a lot of work and it's a new job. So it's inherently stressful because I don't necessarily know the routine yet, right? So there's a lot of things that we can look at in life that are still labeled as stress, but they're not necessarily bad or scary. So again, just thinking about stress is a physiologic demand, and it is also something that spends your energy, whereas rest When you're in the opposite of a stress state, that is something that earns the energy back. So let's talk about the three main scores that you're going to get when you take the cortisol debt assessment. The first one is going to be your external score or your life load. And both of these, external and internal, it's out of a score of 90, and you want a lower score. So a lower score is what we're aiming for here. But just a quick note, this is not a quiz. This is not like if you get a high score, it doesn't mean you're bad or wrong. It's just a checkpoint. It's just something to give you some awareness. So in the first section of the cortisol debt score, you're going to be asked questions about your time boundaries, how late are you staying up, how much are you working, how much are you doing things for others versus protecting your peace for yourself. And so, for example, I feel like I took this quiz maybe a year ago when I was creating it. And I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. And I gave myself a score. And this was kind of before the book launch. And I feel like I'd been doing the writing and I was really enjoying kind of the downtime and that stuff. And I got a pretty low score. I was pretty happy. I'd been really good about my boundaries and protecting my peace. And then flash forward like a month ago, I retook the score because I was kind of thinking about podcasts and some other things. And I got a higher score because I've had a lot of extra things on my plate for the last couple months with launching this book. And it doesn't mean that I'm doing anything wrong or bad, but it actually made me sit and think, oh, you know what? I might need to prioritize making some more boundaries in my external life. I need to make sure I'm making some extra rest deposits, because that's, again, how I want you to look at it. You might go through seasons where you have a higher spend, which happens in life, right? You might have a season where you need a new roof, or you're planning a vacation, or things that are fun spends, but you need to make sure that there's enough funds in that account to cover it, because if there aren't, that's when the body will start to give you symptoms. That's when the body will ramp up adrenaline production. That's when the body will start stealing from your sex hormones, and you will start to not feel very good, right? So you're going to look at your external score. It's going to be out of 0 to 90. And if it's on the higher side, it usually means you are not setting boundaries in your own life to protect your sleep, to protect your energy. So it's just a reflection of what's going on. Now, then when we go to look at the internal score, like the internal life load in this cortisol debt assessment, that's going to be assessing. It's not necessarily running labs. It's not going to give you a diagnosis, but it is going to give you some information. If your internal score is higher here, this means you might need to go talk to your provider. You might need to get some lab work done. It usually is looking at, hey, are you struggling with nutrient deficiencies? Is there maybe an infection that's going on? Are there some food allergies? Are there some hormonal balances? So again, if your score is really high in this one, I highly encourage you to schedule an appointment with a provider that you trust and that you like. Ask them to run some numbers. Ask them to look at some things, because something might not be right. And here's the cool thing about internal stressors. Sometimes it's a little bit easier than an external stressor. If you have a nutrient deficiency and you test it for it on a lab, that's a pretty easy fix. If your iron is low, you can start taking iron. Or if your vitamin D is low, you can start taking vitamin D. So these are sometimes things that we can actually have more control over than sometimes the things in our external world. Obviously, we can set boundaries and, make more deposits, but we can't control politics. We can't control necessarily what our boss is going to do. We can't control traffic. So sometimes in our external life, there's things that we're not necessarily going to be able to directly impact. But when we're looking at the inside of the body, again, if you've got a food sensitivity or a food allergy, you can change your diet and lifestyle to remove that food, so that's not causing as much of a stress on the body. So when you get these two scores, it's also interesting to look at, is my external load the same as my internal load? Is it higher? Is it lower? So you can be like, oh, hey, listen, my external life load's not necessarily bad. It's pretty good. I've got like a 20 on that one. And then maybe your internal life load is high. And so again, that's to be like, hey, I need to go see my provider and see what else is going on. Or if your internal life load is really low and the external one is high, then it might be time to look at your life and be like, hey, where can I make some changes? And if you can't make changes, right? If I think about my life right now, there's a lot of things I can't cut out, right? I can't get rid of my children. I don't want to quit my job. I love my work, right? Those are my two biggest spends currently. And so instead of changing those things, what I can do is increase my cortisol bank account deposits, right? Which look like rest. I can make sure I'm meditating for 15 minutes a day. I love to do puzzles. I like to do Sudoku. I like to read. I can just make sure I'm doing those things regularly to make those deposits. I also, during seasons of higher stress or higher load, like on the external side of things, I'm a really big fan of I go to bed by 9:30. And if I don't feel that great. So this current season of my life, I'm really going to bed early because I know when I get that extra hour of sleep, it
really recharges me and helps me so much the next day. Another thing I really like to do is I typically block one day a month and I call it a bed day. And I literally don't get out of bed. And now my husband does it with me too. And we tell the kids we're going to be in bed all day. We're not going anywhere. We're going to take all our meals in bed. We are going to read. We're going to watch movies. We're going to have sex. We are just going to stay in bed. And it's fantastic. It's a great little recharge. I highly recommend it if that's something you can work into your schedule. And the nice thing about this is if you plan for it, you're not going to feel guilty. I mean, it's literally on our calendar. Like I actually have one this Sunday. We are not getting out of bed all Sunday this weekend. And I'm looking forward to it. And I know I have a really busy week the following week. And I know I'm going to wake up Monday morning and be like, ooh, I got tons of rest. I recharged my account. I feel great. So sometimes if life gets really busy and you're like, ooh, I'm having a hard time fitting in these smaller moments, having a day where you can really recharge can really be helpful. And sometimes maybe it's a whole weekend. When I was in med school, I would pick 2 days. I would stop studying Friday afternoon and I wouldn't look at my books. I wouldn't do anything studying wise. And I would take 2.5 days essentially and would recharge. And it was great. It kind of helped me get through med school when I had a lot to do on my plate. So now we're going to talk about the 4 cortisol debt profiles. So there's 4 kind of score categories. So you'll get your score and then I'm going to talk about what it means and this is looking at your overall score. So you're going to add together your external and your internal life load. If you take this online, it's going to do that for you automatically. You'll get your score. So the first category I call balance. And it's if you have a score between 0 and 45. So meaning you're doing pretty well. And if you have this score, what this means is what you're currently doing is working. You are not overspending your cortisol. You are making good deposits. And so the message for you, if this is your score profile, is keep doing what you're doing. You might be protecting your sleep. And a good thing here might be like, hey, okay, I've got this balanced score. What am I doing that's keeping this account balanced? Because it's good to be aware of, hey, am I going to bed early? Am I prioritizing rest? Am I, setting boundaries? Am I making sure I don't have anyone in my life that's, not respecting my boundaries? What am I doing to keep my cortisol account so balanced? Because we want to keep doing that. Getting this score does not mean just like, if you've got a good credit score and you're really good at sticking to your budget, it doesn't mean you're going to go spend all your money willy-nilly. It means you're going to keep practicing that good financial practice, right? So you're going to keep practicing whatever you're doing to protect your energy. So, and the interesting thing I want to touch on here is I find that most of my patients in their 20s and 30s, if they're really good about keeping this account balance, they're good at protecting their peace, they're good at, making good energy deposits, they've got a great sleep hygiene. When they hit midlife, so for women, perimenopause and menopause, and for men, andropause, it's a little easier for them. They don't have as many crazy symptoms because when our cortisol count gets too low, and the body still has a lot to do, you will start to steal from your sex hormones. And in your 20s and 30s, you have plenty of sex hormones. It's like you've got a good savings account. So you can go steal from there. But when you hit midlife is when your sex hormones start to dwindle and your savings, it's basically like your savings account is going to go bye-bye. So we want to make sure that when you enter midlife, you've got a really good cortisol bank account because that's going to help protect you from the really not so fun midlife symptoms that can kick up. So if you're in this balanced, category, you've got a score of 0 to 45 and, maybe you're in perimenopause, maybe you're before then, or maybe you're after, we want to keep this score up. Right? You're doing a great job. So category 2, this is if your score is between 46 to 90. And we call this the overspending and you're just beginning to overspend. So this is, I'll be honest, I feel like I fluctuate when I take this test between this and when I'm doing a really good job, I'm in the 0 to 45 balance thing. But I'll be honest, currently I'm in this category. I'm just starting to overspend a little bit. And this is where a lot of people are in this category without realizing it. You still probably feel okay, but you might be drinking a little bit more caffeine. Maybe you're staying up a little bit later. You're not really holding your boundaries of putting your phone down before you go to bed. You're just starting to make a couple lifestyle changes where you are, again, spending a little more energy than you might be earning. And if we keep this up, just like if you overspend for a prolonged period of time, we will eventually see the cortisol accounts drop lower, just like your bank account will drop lower if you keep overspending and don't make enough deposits. But so if this is your score, this is a time to be like, okay, I need to reassess and this, like, where am I making my deposits and where am I potentially overspending? So all this means is you probably just need a couple slight adjustments. And if you make those adjustments, I promise you'll get right back into that balance score and you'll be great. But if we let it linger here for a long time, we just want to prevent getting into some of the deeper cortisol debt scores. So again, if you've got this overspending category, this is the time to be like, hey, okay, where could I make some mild changes in my life? Maybe it's, I need to go to bed an hour earlier. I shared earlier, that makes a really big difference for me. Maybe I want to implement the bed day once a month, or maybe I need to make sure I'm eating protein before I drink my caffeine. I cannot tell you how many of my patients who make that one small change, because so many women I work with, they skip breakfast and they drink caffeine and they don't eat anything until noon. Then at 2 or 3 p.m., their energy crashes and then they get a second wind and then they can't fall asleep. And it's basically their blood sugar is a roller coaster all day. When blood sugar dips, which is what will happen if you drink caffeine without eating any protein, that's going to call on cortisol. It's going to be a big cortisol spend. It's a major stressor, a major internal stressor to the body. So, if you're in this category and you're like, oh yeah, I have been skipping breakfast and drinking my caffeine, that's a really simple change. Start drinking a protein shake, eat a protein bar. It doesn't have to be a giant meal if you're busy and on the run, but make sure you're getting some sort of protein before caffeine enters your body. I find in my own life, I didn't do caffeine for a long time, and I've been doing it a little bit more lately, but if I drink caffeine and don't have protein, I'll feel great for a couple hours and then I crash hard. But if I get up, have a protein shake, have, some other form of breakfast, and wait till about 10 a.m. to have my caffeine, I feel like the rest of the day goes fantastic. So this might, looking at your timing of when you're eating and when you're drinking caffeine can make a really big difference in how much cortisol your body's spending. So again, looking at sleep, looking at caffeine, looking at blood sugar habits, these can be really, really simple changes to make that make a really big difference and should hopefully help you move out of this overspending category back into the balance category. All right, next score category. So if your score was between 91 and 135, this is what we call a pretty moderate cortisol debt. So, you want to look at the difference between your external versus internal, but this means your body is struggling quite a bit. And this is where you may really start to be seeing symptoms. Your body's no longer whispering things. Your body is like, hey, something is wrong. This is when we see really deep fatigue. You might see disrupted sleep patterns. Joint pain can show up here, sometimes acne or hair loss. The body is going to be telling you, hey, you are spending more energy than you are earning, and it really wants you to listen. So if this is where you are, the basics, like we talked about last time, so, the protein before coffee or caffeine, making good sleep changes are going to be a really big difference. But here's the biggest thing. If you're in this category, and this is something I see in a lot of my patients, is I want you to look at your exercise habits. If you are exercising, a lot of times what I see in this category, because a lot of times people struggle with weight when they're in this category as well. They start gaining weight or they struggle to lose weight. And if you've listened to this podcast for a while, I have that analogy where I talk about if your body's like a house, inside your house, you have your kitchen, your bathroom, and your laundry room. These are like your major internal organs. Weight you want to lose is like a basement closet that's filled with junk. You have to have energy in order to clean out that closet. So if your bank account is really low, your cortisol bank account is low, there's no way the body is going to have enough energy to clean out that closet. But here's what I see is a lot of people get into this state and they're struggling with their weight. They don't feel good and they think, oh, I need to push harder. I need to dial in my diet more. I need to go to the gym more. I need to push, trying to lose weight, trying to feel better. But if you're in this state, this is actually going to backfire for you. The answer here is not to do more. The answer is actually to do a lot less. And particularly when it comes to your exercise, this is where when my patients come in and I'm like, okay, body's kind of struggling. This is where we want to cut out all the cardio. You may even want to lower the intensity of your lifting if that's what you're doing. Walking, yoga, you still want to be moving your body. Don't get me wrong, movement is really important, but exercise can sometimes be something that I see a lot of my, particularly men and women, overdoing it because they think, hey, exercise is good for me. And listen, exercise is good for you, but it is a major energy spend. And if your energy is already pretty low, this is a pretty easy one to be like, you know what, right now, while I'm rebuilding my account, I'm going to lower the intensity of my exercise right now. And I know this is not the message that a lot of people like to hear. Bottom line here, look at your exercise and just see, hey, do I think I'm overspending with my exercise? And the way to really track this and to know if you're overdoing it with your workouts is actually to look at your resting heart rate. In today's world, a lot of people wear trackers, so you'll be able to quickly figure out what your resting heart rate is. If you wear an Oura Ring or Whoop or an Apple Watch, it'll give you some data on that. If you don't, take your resting heart rate, and it's what happens like when you first wake up in the morning, take your heart rate. And you want to do this after a couple of days of not overdoing it or not exercising. So let's say your heart rate is in the 60s on a normal morning. If you then go run 5 miles or do a really intense HIIT class or do some sort of intense exercise, the next morning, take your resting heart rate again If your resting heart rate is 10 to 15 beats per minute over what your normal resting heart rate is, that means you overdid it the day before. So this is a really simple way for you to be like, oh, is my exercise draining me or is it maybe helping me? So looking at your resting heart rate, again, is a really easy way to track, is this exercise actually beneficial for you or is it super draining you? And I wear an Oura ring and it will tell me like, oh hey, like your resting heart rate lowered late last night, or it's a little high, and that's usually a sign like, oh, I think I overdid it yesterday. I had a day a couple weeks ago where I like had a day off and I was like, oh, I'm gonna go do yoga and then I'm gonna take a walk, and then I ended up walking again with a friend. I think I exercised for a total of like 3 hours, and the next day I was beat. I was really tired. It was too much for me, and I didn't do anything super intense, but it was too much of a spend for me, right? And my resting heart rate was higher. So a good way to look at that, particularly if you're in this category. So again, the message here is we don't want to push harder if this was your score. You want to be like, where can I add in more rest, and big time more rest, and where can I really cut some spends? So that is category 3. Now we're going to move on to category 4. And this is if your score is between 136 and 180. And if you get this score, this means you are pretty deeply depleted. And if this is your score, you probably really don't feel well. And I just want to be super clear here. This does not mean you're broken. This does not mean you're getting like an F in life. It just means, again, this is information on your body overspending. And so it's an opportunity for you to be like, wow, I really need to make some changes. And I think for a lot of patients in this, or people in this category, getting support. So maybe that's working with a provider to help, because if your score is this high, it means your internal load is also going to be quite high. So this would be, a good clue to say, hey, I need to call my doctor, or maybe I need to find a new provider to help me investigate, what's going on inside my body. So get support from a provider that really has your back. And I always say, if you don't like your provider, find someone you do like, because that relationship is a really, really important one. So get support with a provider. And if you're not, if you've got a lot of emotional things, I find people in this category also may be dealing with grief. They might be dealing with, I have a patient that came in recently, like she lost her mom, her daughter just got diagnosed with autism, her husband's struggling, he just had a cancer diagnosis. So she has a lot going on, a lot on her plate. Her internal body is actually doing okay. But, because of what's going on externally, it's starting to affect, her habits. She's, not eating well. Her blood sugar's all over the place. She is one that like turns to exercise. She's actually been over exercising, which is actually depleting her further. So my point is in here, we talked last time, she had stopped going to therapy because she had, a year ago had been feeling great, and she hadn't really even thought to be like, oh, maybe I need some more support. So if that's something you're open to, getting a therapist or a coach can be really, really helpful. When your nervous system feels supported, that's when it can relax more. And the more your body can relax, the easier it's going to be for you to build that bank account back. So work with a provider you like, maybe look into therapy or working with a coach so that you have that support end. So you really want to get support. And then setting boundaries is a really big one here with your own time. So, I think a lot of people in this category too, they work too much and they say yes to too many things. They say, yes, I can help you move. Yes, I can do that. Yes, I can drive your kid so-and-so. Yes, I can take on one more project. If this is your score, this is not the time to be saying yes to everything. This is the time to be like, no, you know what? I can't do that right now. There's a great book by Melissa Urban, who founded Whole30. It's called The Book of Boundaries. I read it a few years ago, and it really changed my thoughts on boundaries. I feel like I personally have done a lot of work on boundaries in the last couple of years because I've been in this score category. I've been deeply depleted, and most of it for me was because I was saying yes to everything. And I didn't really know how to say no, and I wanted to please everyone, right? So the biggest takeaway I had from the Book of Boundaries was that boundaries don't just help you, they actually help the other person. When you are clear and concise with what your needs are, it teaches the other person how to handle you, right? If you like say, oh no, I can do that, but here's XYZ, all the reasons I can't do that, and blah, 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 it confuses the other person. And so when you are clear and you set a boundary, it makes life so much easier. So I highly recommend that book for anyone listening, or any score that you're in, but particularly if in this deeply depleted category. So support, boundaries, and then all of the basics, right? Getting good sleep, drinking enough water, having protein before your caffeine, getting protein throughout the day, keeping your blood sugar balanced, doing your blood work to figure out what else is going on, and really assessing where can I start to make more deposits. And again, this is, I want you to be very clear, because I've had a couple patients take this and they freak out because they're like, oh my God, I got the worst score ever. Does this mean I'm dying? No, use this as an opportunity to be like, hey, my body's struggling. I need to make some changes. What changes can I make? And then I highly recommend make some small changes and retake the test in a couple months and see if your score's better. That's why this test is really cool, because you can take it multiple times and you can see, hey, things have changed. I'm actually getting a better score because look at what I've done. Look at how I've protected my peace. Look at I've made these changes. So you can use this as a marking point kind of throughout your journey with this. And then I also just want you to know that, like, this score doesn't tell the whole story, right? This is not a diagnosis. Having a bad score, having a good score, it's not really about the grade or the test. It's information. And we want to use that information to help your body feel better and to make some good lifestyle changes. And so where can you find the quiz? Well, if you have the book, the quiz is at the beginning of the book. So you can, if you're a paper person and you want to, write it down, you can do that in the book. If you prefer to do things online, again, you can go to the website, drerinkinney.com. It's right on there, the Cortisol Debt Assessment. It'll give you your score right there. So you can go take the quiz. You can take it multiple times after, it's funny. I had someone take the quiz and then read the book, and then she took it again. And just because she'd kind of learned some things and she had some awareness, and she was like, oh, I think my awareness around some of this stuff had changed, and she was planning to implement some things. So, a couple small tweaks and you might get a different score. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I hope you've used the Cortisol Debt Assessment to kind of get some more information about your body and what your cortisol debt looks like, right? Again, we all have a financial, we know what our financial picture looks like. We know what our credit score looks like, but this is a really cool way to know, what does your cortisol account look like? Thanks, guys. See you next week.
Thank you for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to connect with me on social media to find more helpful tips and information. You can find me at Dr. Kinney on all of the platforms. And please be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and/or a review. This helps grow the show so more people have access to this knowledge that leads to empowered healing. Love and light, and see you next week.